I come over the rise, and then I'm up out of the hatch. I immediately see 8 T-72s. They're part of a much larger force of, maybe 60 tanks or so, and other armored vehicles and more tanks in depth. My gunner says tanks direct front. I see him. And I said, fire, sabo, and adjust. We have a high explosive tank round in the breach. We fired that at the first tank. I have a very vivid memory of this tank. It was at very close range. The high explosive round goes into the tank, detonates the ammunition in the tank, and the tank commander is ejected out of that tank into the air, and he's on fire.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we have an amazing combat story as we sit down with the legendary retired 3-star General HR McMaster, whose 34 years of service included everything from spearheading the last great tank-on-tank engagement in the famous Battle of 73 Easting to serving as President Trump's national security advisor. McMaster has been a dream interview for our program for years, and it does not disappoint. We cover so much in this episode, from exactly what it felt like in the tanks on that fateful day, taking on and destroying the Tawalkana Division of the Iraqi Republican Guard in minutes, to leading a cavalry regiment that successfully and overwhelmingly destroyed an Qaida element in Tal Afar in Iraq in 2006. This is an amazing description of combined arms warfare that I had really never heard of, to chance encounters with world leaders like Henry Kissinger, to name just a few. We spend some time discussing the General's most recent book, At War with Ourselves, about his time in Trump's White House. It's an amazing look inside the West Wing, and really is what the decisions and people and personalities are all about. Fans of this show will love this book. We get McMaster's perspective from the Battle of 73 Easting, but if you want an even more detailed description of that battle, check out our past interview with one of McMaster's platoon leaders, Tim Gauthier, who was part of that fight. I sincerely hope you enjoy this glimpse into one of our country's greatest and most selfless leaders as much as I did. Sir, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down with us and share your story.
Hey, Ryan, great to be with you. I'm a huge fan of what you're doing, so great to be with you.
I think we have to start with Tim Gauthier, if that's all right. So for people who've listened, and I think this episode will go nicely with the one that we did with Tim, and we dove deep into the Battle of 73 Easting, and he was one of your platoon leaders. One of the things he mentioned was how competitive you were. And he said at one point in time, the two of you got into a little bit of a scuffle, maybe at PT, maybe it was Ultimate Frisbee or something. So just out of curiosity, two things there. Who actually won that scuffle? And then secondly, where does the competitiveness come from?
Well, I mean, I just think I've always just been competitive, in sports and everything else. And then, of course, combat's competitive, right? And what you always want to do is overmatch your adversary, because, barely winning in battle is not pretty for anybody, So I've always had this kind of competitive nature, and I've always played contact sports. Like I played football, I played rugby all through college, and I was still playing, at the time when Tim and I were together, I was still playing club rugby in Germany. So, I used to have more of a temper than I have now as well, so I don't remember the incident, I don't remember it, but, it sounds true to me. I mean, it would be true to form, kind of, because, I'm sure it involved some form of contact, playing whatever the hell we were playing. And then, of course, you learn too in contact sports, you just leave it on the field, right? I mean, especially rugby. I think rugby has great lessons for society, which is you're at each other, and then you have a beer together, and
I also saw in your book, At War with Ourselves, you mentioned playing rugby, and I wanted to touch on that. I grew up in Southern Africa, so I played rugby as a kid, shoeless in first grade, and then into spikes, and then I played in the Army in Germany as well. So what position did you play?
I was a wing,
Were you?
Yes, I was deceptively slow. And so, I played center and wing, and people think that I played probably, wing forward or, loose forward. But I mean, South Africa, man, fantastic, world champions. Yeah. I was at the match actually in Paris at the World Cup. And then I saw Springboks. They were leaving around the same time we were from the airport. So I got to talk with Faf de Klerk and a whole bunch of these guys. He was the scrum half. And they were fantastic. They were really welcoming. They were, of course, very happy they just won. But, and I'm kind of an All Blacks fan too. So
it's hard not to be an All Blacks fan.
The final match.
So, but
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, okay. I mean, and Six Nations is about to start here, so it's big rugby season. More Americans need to watch rugby, don't you think?
I completely agree.
I think they would be more interested in rugby than football. I mean, no breaks, 2 40-minute halves,
it goes full on.
Constant action, right?
Yeah.
No substitutions.
It's a big team sport.
Nobody takes oxygen on the sideline. I mean,
you come off, you're off, right? You're not going back on. I also saw in the book you grew up in Philly, so I didn't know if there's kind of a toughness or a competitiveness that came from there. But I'm just curious how you grew up. Did you come up in a military family?
Right.
I know you did, but would love to hear more.
No, I grew up in a really great extended family. My mom was a fantastic teacher. She's one who really got me interested in history from since when I can remember. And my father, at the time he was working for the city of Philadelphia, but he ran for Congress in '68. But he was an Army Reserve non-commissioned officer. He was the first sergeant of an infantry company in the Germantown neighborhood of Philadelphia. And then he got a direct commission from first sergeant to captain, and then came back and was the company commander of the same company that he was the first sergeant in.
Well, I bet he had a lot of credibility if you were the first sergeant. You step in,
right? And so that exposed me to the Army. Obviously, my dad's service. He was a Korean War veteran who went to the Korean War. He volunteered at the age of 17. Was a BAR gunner, Browning automatic rifle gunner, and he went there as a private and left as a sergeant first class. And a great infantry soldier and officer. And so we didn't live the military life of moving around from post to post, but I was always drawn to military service. Always wanted to be an officer in the Army, and so I, in the opposite of what normally happens, I begged my parents to go to military high school at Valley Forge Military Academy, and then I went to West Point from there.
What was the nucleus or the origin of maybe the love? History permeates your career. It just seems like. Where does the history love come from? And then what was the kernel for the Army that just blossomed into
Well, so, my mom was a teacher. She's a fantastic teacher. She taught in inner city Philadelphia in probably the most underserved neighborhood in the city at 12th and Rush in North Philadelphia at the Clymer School. And she was a charismatic teacher. She's a charismatic mom, and she got my sister and I interested in history, and we lived in Philadelphia. What a great place to be,
of course,
in terms of learning the history of our nation. And then she just got me interested in reading history. And then for family vacations, we would go to Gettysburg,
of course,
and do like a family staff ride, or we go to Yorktown, and so we had this interest in history that permeated my family, and we all were in together. And I just read, I read a lot of military biographies and military history, the youth literature and everything since I was in grade school, really. So,
are you always reading 2 books at a time? It just seems like you're incredibly well read. Like, how many are you reading right now? Do you have one currently that you're really excited about that you might share with people?
So I normally have like 3 or 4 different books going at the same time. And you know what I did over the holidays? I mean, I read fiction for the first time in a long time again. And I'm a big fan of Christopher Buckley's work because he's so funny. I mean, he's a satirist but he's written these great novels. He's written like 17 books, right? And this book was called The Judge Hunters, and it's a fantastic story of really an anti-hero, like who goes to America in the 17th century to hunt down those who were guilty of killing the king, right? And so the geography is all around, Manhattan and New York, which was Dutch at the time, and then Connecticut and so geographically it's interesting, but the characters are really rich, and the guy who just, seems like a cad, he turns out to be really, an effective leader, and he's partnered with it. Anyway, it's a great story. I love it. But I'm also, finishing a book that I've been reading now, probably, I hate to admit it now, for like a year, but I love it. And I'm just reading like a couple chapters at a time before I go on to something else. And that's The British Are Coming, which is the first volume of the 3-volume history of the Revolution that Rick Atkinson has written. And he's a fantastic author. I mean, and so, of course, he did the Liberation Trilogy on World War II, with An Army at Dawn, Day of Battle, and Guns at Last Light, which I recommend to everybody, And he's one of these historians, right, who writes so compelling history, such compelling history, because he goes from the strategic down to the tactical.
Yeah, he's amazing.
And then he's found all these collections of letters and personal experiences, that nobody's ever accessed. Like one of these It's a letter written to his family from a dying British officer who's been wounded at Bunker Hill. And I mean,
That's fascinating.
It's just it's fascinating stuff. Yeah.
You mentioned going to Gettysburg as a family. It's just funny. So my father was an Army vet in Vietnam and then a career state officer. And people who've listened to this have heard me say this, but just to compare stories here, when we were posted to Belgium, and my mom used to say, like, get out of the house with the 3 boys, I need some sanity, he would take us to the battlefield. So my brothers and I joke today, we felt like we've fought in some of the battles of the world wars just because we've been there so many times and covered that ground.
Oh, no. And I'm doing the same thing with my daughters now, right? So I was helping our daughter move some furniture from her dorm at UVA up to my other daughter's home. She had already graduated and was working in Washington. And so we rented a U-Haul and we passed Manassas Battlefield. And I'm like, hey, we're going for a battlefield tour. And I pulled the U-Haul in. And so she took a picture of us and sent it out on the family, the family chat.
Love it.
#predictable. I'm at a battlefield right now.
For those who can't see, my son Owen is off screen. We've gone to that battlefield many times, and a Cracker Barrel that's right there. Okay, so is it fair to say for At War with Ourselves, it feels very detailed, and I'm curious throughout your career if you've been did you journal throughout your time?
No, I don't really journal. I would, I mean, I wish I had. I don't have the discipline to do it. And then, as you know, if you're in a job, you're task oriented.
Always, yeah.
So, like in my notebooks, I've got tasks in there. I've got something the president told me to do. That's in there.
Yep.
But it's not like a journal or my reflections or anything like that. So what I had to do was like kind of go to my daily diary, which is diary. I mean, just like kind of the appointment book.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I did that I'm really grateful that I did, because I'm kind of a historian, right? So I felt like a duty to capture for history my experience. So I did classified oral history interviews across 5 days at my home with National Archives historians and our staff historian on the NSC staff.
Interesting.
And so that was when everything was fresh in my memory. And so that has gone through a declassification process, is available now if anyone wants to see the oral history. But I use that as one of the bases of the book.
No wonder, yeah.
And then I have this amazing team of research assistants here at Stanford, and we have done 100 or so oral history interviews of people I served with in the Trump administration.
Amazing.
Those are now going to be here at the Hoover Archive. And so I had the benefit of, kind of our collective experience and drawing on it. And then there was enough in my notebooks, which are now all at the National Archives under President Trump's papers, for the first administration. There was enough in there, that I could recreate the events.
Yeah, it is very detailed and rich, which I think makes it really compelling. And now that takes me to kind of 73 Easting. One of the things that's fascinated me about that since studying it when I was in OBC was that you had your troopers document it the next day, right? And we'll get into the battle a little bit here, but what made you think to do that? And was it planned ahead of time, or was it you recognized the moment and asked them to do this?
So I really recognized the moment, right?
Yeah.
So I had, as a consumer of military history, I believed that it was really important to capture the experience of battle so that other soldiers can learn from that experience of battle well into the future. Yep. And, you can get a lot out of training, right? I mean, but what you really can't get out of training a lot of times is the psychological and the emotional experience of combat. And so that's what I wanted to elicit from our soldiers. And, I'd read books like The Face of Battle, which is a fantastic book. I don't know if I'd read it at the time, but I'm sure I had. And then also, I'd read a lot of fiction about battle. Tolstoy's short stories are fantastic.
Interesting.
And I think I just had a sense of duty to my soldiers to help them capture their experience, and to also make that available for especially military readers and audience. And so I just asked for their no structure to it. Tell me your story about your story of the battle that we all experienced together. And so you get these vast different perspectives, and really insights into combat.
Yeah.
Like, for example, one of our gunners, and this I don't want it to sound trite at all about taking a human life or anything like that, but he had this saying, he said, before the battle, I felt a lot of stress. After the battle and during the battle, I felt no stress. because he was engaged in active combat. And then you realize, that the anticipation of combat oftentimes creates maybe a sense of fear, stress, anxiety. But when you're in the fight, your adrenaline takes over, especially if you have confidence in one another.
Yeah. I remember him talking about that specifically, and then Tim had shared some of the write-ups and just reading through them.
Right.
You got forward observers, you got guys in the tanks, all in that battle from where they saw it. It's fascinating.
Yes, Sergeant McReynolds. Sergeant McReynolds, this is one of Tim Gauthier's section sergeants. Yeah. He said when the battle happened, it just kind of came automatic.
Yeah.
Nobody had to tell us what to do because we had trained so hard. Sergeant Martinez, one of our tank gunners, he said, it kind of seemed easy to us because we had trained so hard. And so that makes you feel good, because as a leader, because you feel, what you really have the sacred responsibility that you realize when you're in a leadership position. I'm sure this is your experience too, that you want no soldier to ever die in combat or suffer a wound in combat because that soldier wasn't properly trained, and we had made it, we exceeded the standard on training. I mean, sometimes to the chagrin of some of our sergeants,
Well, actually, that's one of the questions I wanted to ask, because I think everybody knows you need to train more. But one of the tough things as a leader, and I'm clearly speaking as a junior leader, not at your level and where you've gone, but just encouraging people to get out there and train again, do it again, and fighting the pushback that comes with that is not an easy task for a leader, I think. Right. And that's one of the things that it's hard to prepare for when you're in ROTC or the academies.
Right. Exactly. And one of our great platoon sergeants, Sergeant First Class Eddie Wallace, a tanker, extremely competent, master gunner. He came up to me, just before we deployed. He goes, I think you're pushing us too hard. You're burning people out, which is good counsel to get.
Yeah.
But I said, hey, Sergeant Wallace, we're going hard because, this is life and death. I believe we're going to go to combat. I think this was before we got alerted. The day after the battle, Sergeant Wallace comes up to me and he said, hey, I just got to tell you, I think you're right. It paid off. The training paid off, and then, I think also you have to make sure you aren't burning people out. But I think you have to also explain always the why of why you're training so hard, right? And then of course you can see the payoff and it results in training. I mean, we had a fight at the Combined Combat Maneuver or Combined Arms Maneuver Training Center, which is like the big instrumented training center in Germany. Before we deployed, before we were alerted to deploy. And the battle that our troop fought in, we called it the Big Kibosh because we had destroyed 63 enemy vehicles and only lost 2 Bradleys. So you can see the payoff in training, but where you can really see it is combat, because the confidence you develop in training serves as a bulwark against fear.
Yeah,
and fear is what is it's debilitating in combat, right?
I think that's one of the things you mentioned in one of the speeches when you were the national security advisor to, I think it was maybe to the Annapolis grads, something about it's the psychological and emotional training and care that goes in. That's such an important part of being a leader in the military for this exact reason.
Absolutely.
Just before we jump into 73 Easting, you do mention in the book this moment where you're introduced to another general and it's, so-and-so was the number 1 officer at West Point when he graduated, and you said, I was number 1 too, but in demerits. So I just want to check on that. What was that experience? Were you really, I doubt you were that far off the rails.
No, I was number 1 after my first 2 years. Okay. I had accrued all of my demerits and what they call disciplinary tours, or these are the tours you have to walk off in the area.
Okay.
Right? So I put a lot of time in there. I was a victim of circumstance, I was misunderstood at times, right? But I think because I had gone to a military high school, like I knew what was a game and what wasn't, and what was really serious and important. So I didn't take what they call at West Point the 4th class system seriously.
What is that? What's the 4th class?
It's kind of the, it's like the rites of initiation you have to go through. And now West Point's a lot better on a lot of this now, by the way. I talk to cadets a lot of times at West Point now. They're like, man, I love it. I'm like,
Something's wrong.
Do you really love it? And they're like, yeah, we love it. Because actually there's been a series of really good leadership, really good leaders at West Point. West Point is as challenging as ever. Believe me.
I know you taught there.
Oh, yeah.
You've been back.
And the old grads, they usually say, the Corps has. What that means is like the Corps has gone to hell since I left, right?
Yeah, of course.
The same thing like Ranger School, right? Ranger School was what used to be hard, man. But
Soft now.
It's not hard. It's not soft. It's hard. It's hard as it ever was. So, I'm so proud of the leaders at West Point, but the cadets who go there, they're fantastic. It's restorative to go back to that place. And so I realized after that first 2 years I need to walk a straighter line. Because everybody who had more disciplinary tours than me didn't make it to the next year. Right. That's what put me in the lead there for a while. So
the other people dropped out of the lead spot.
They got ejected, basically.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Mint Mobile, and we'll get right back to this combat story. I don't know about you, but I like keeping my money where I can see it. Unfortunately, traditional big wireless carriers also seem to like keeping my money too. After years of overpaying for wireless, I finally got fed up from crazy high wireless bills, bogus fees, and free perks that actually cost more in the long run and switched to Mint Mobile. We're saving every month thanks to Mint Mobile on the phone I use for my combat story work. And not only is it great, but the coverage does not disappoint. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/combat story. That's mintmobile.com/combat story. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, and full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. And now back to this combat story.
So, but I always, I was playing rugby, loved that, loved boxing, loved my friends there. The summer training I loved, and I think I did well there. I mean, one of the situations I had at West Point was I had not a great relationship with my tactical officer. That's the person who has responsibility for developing you militarily, and he failed me in leadership.
Wow.
And so back then, which is another thing that's better.
Yeah. It
wasn't a 360-degree assessment. Your professors didn't assess you. Others didn't assess you. It was just him, and he and I, we were kind of like oil and water.
Yeah.
And so all my professors jumped in, my rugby coaches, but I had been on summer training the summer before, and I went directly into an infantry platoon at 1-8 Infantry at Fort Carson, Colorado, deployed to this new thing called the National Training Center.
Oh, wow.
And our platoon did a good job.
Oh, how great.
And so our battalion commander had recommended me for a commendation medal, the Army Commendation Medal, which you can't get as a cadet. Yeah. But that was in my file to counteract, this misunderstanding of me by my tactical officer.
Got it. Okay.
So I squeaked through. Squeaked through.
Oh, that's interesting. What was the decision to go cav, to go armor?
Yeah. Well, I like telling the story because, here at Stanford, tremendous students here, right? Everybody wants to map out their lives. Like when they graduate, they want to know what's the best first job, second job, third job. I'm like, don't worry about it. Let me tell you a story. And the story is really how I came into, the jobs that I came into in the Army. I was commissioned as an aviation officer from West Point in 1984.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Wow.
I wanted to fly scout helicopters, right? I had read Chicken Hawk, the novel
I definitely read that.
on Vietnam. And I wanted to be an aero scout. I thought this has got to be the coolest thing. So I infantry was my second choice, and armor was my third choice. So I go to Fort Knox, Kentucky, because aviation had just once again become a branch in the Army. Because remember, after that sad day in 1947 when the Air Force gained its independence, and it was no longer the Army Air Corps, there was no longer a branch. It was a secondary specialty. So you would be an infantry officer or an armor officer, and then you would go to flight school, and then you would have a dual track, aviator armor, or aviator cav, aviator artillery, aviator intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. So it was changing back to a branch. But Fort Rucker, which is the home of aviation, had not stood up its basic course yet. Yep. So I went to Fort Knox. They found astigmatism in my eye that they had missed on previous flight physicals. And they said, hey, you're no longer an aviation officer. I said, okay, well, infantry, like Second Lieutenant McMaster, right? I'm talking to what is now Human Resources Command. Yeah. I'm like, well, actually, I'd like to go to Fort Benning, which is now Fort Moore, and start over my training because I want to be an infantry officer. That was my second choice. Don't I get my second choice? So like, oh yeah, well, thanks for that suggestion, Lieutenant. But you're at Fort Knox. You know what that means? That means you're an armor officer.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So I applied to pre-ranger. I compete for a ranger slot. And then, it's time to figure out like where my assignment's going to be. So again, I put in my preference because I thought, hey, I'd like to go to Germany, because a lot of tanks in Germany, and that's the front line of the Cold War. I think that's where I'd like to go. Thanks for your preference, Lieutenant. Fort Hood, Texas, it is, which is now Fort Cavazos.
That's right.
So I went to my first unit. Nothing worked out the way I thought it would.
Yeah.
And it could not have been better. I went to 166 Armor and 2nd Armor Division. My first job, I'm thinking tank platoon. I'm excited. Support platoon leader.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'm like, what is a support platoon? I don't even know what it is, right? And of course, that's all the logistics for the platoon, the fuel, the ammunition, and so forth. I learned so much in that job. I had great sergeants in that job. We trained our ass off, by the way, because I knew how to get ammo. I'm the support platoon leader. We fired more AT-4s, anti-tank weapons. We fired more machine guns. That was one hell of a fighting, support platoon that we built. And with Sergeant Blakely, my platoon sergeant, and so I guess not to go on about this, but no assignment was ever my first choice until I was fortunate to command the 3rd Cavalry Regiment. It was my first choice for brigade or regimental command. But up to that point, there was always something different. I want to go be an S3 in a Cav regiment. Okay, yeah, but that Cav regiment is the 11th Cav regiment at Fort Irwin, California, in the middle of the Mojave Desert, right? People know probably 40 miles north of the cultural center of Barstow, right? And so it's
not a lot there.
But I think one of the best assignments I ever had.
Yeah.
It was fantastic, So
oh my gosh.
It always worked out.
How about just the moment where, okay, you were all set to go aviation, they find this issue. Right. I mean, you seem like water just rolls off your back right now, but at the time, was it, what's going to happen? I can't, woe is me, or...
No, I thought, how do I now max out this new opportunity?
Yeah.
Right? I'm an armor officer. Tanks were kind of growing on me, and actually, I was in the last M60A3 course.
Oh, wow.
Which is the older tank. And then I wound up going to the first M1 Abrams battalion, that was fielded at Fort Hood. And back then, the Army was not as, maybe safety conscious as it is now. And so I'm the support platoon leader. I'm in my first assignment, and I'm delivering ammo to the range. I had this fantastic 1st Battalion commander, Billy J. McGowan, still lives in Texas. The guy came from a sharecropper family, right?
Wow.
Then, comes into the Army as, he's an African-American guy, in the Army when there was still like a lot of, racial tensions and inequality of opportunity. And he was just the most fantastic leader, charismatic leader, larger-than-life guy. So Billy J. McGowan says, hey, Lieutenant, get on that tank. You're going to take that tank down range. On Table 8 qualification, right? For the tank. I had never even been in an Abrams. I mean, I've been in one.
And this is like an annual, right, like a big deal.
Right. So I get in with a great gunner, great sergeant, and we just do dry runs. And I'm just learning the tank. And like the 50 cal at the time, it's different now. It was like a race ring thing. It was like patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time to fire the 50 cal. So I'm learning all this. And of course, they don't want the lieutenant to be a danger in there. So they give me all the safety brief. We took that tank down range and shot Superior.
No way.
Yeah. Well, a great gunner.
Yeah, you
great
got the people
great loader, great driver. But, it just gives you kind of a sense for like Billy J. McGowan, the kind of the command climate that he established. His successor, a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Sayer, Rich Sayer, another great guy, totally different styles. But I went into that battalion thinking, hey, I'm probably going to do 5 years, and then I'm going to transition out of the Army having served. I bought a suit. Yeah. I signed up with a headhunter firm. I had an interview set up with Procter and Gamble or somebody like in Chicago. I had a plane ticket, like the old digital or the printout plane ticket. And I went to a right arm night at the Officers Club again, one of these points in your career. And my sergeants are there, and they're like, "Hey, what the hell are you doing getting out of the Army? We think you're pretty good at this. You're having a good time. Why would you get out of the Army?" I thought, You're right. And so I went home that night and said to Katie, said to my wife, hey, are you up for just staying in? She's like, yeah, I'm up for staying in. And so then I went to Germany to the 2nd Cav Regiment. And, I mean, there are many points like that. There's many points in my career where, I didn't go in, at my retirement roast kind of that when I retired after 34 years, Katie gave this talk that was like a laugh line every other line, So she's looking at me. She said, "Hey, when I married HR, we're going to get out of the Army after 5 years. Thank you for the bonus 29."
And all the places and the times you've been gone, and the girls.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Okay, so maybe this is a good segue into 73 Easting. Just people have heard the story, and for those who really want the deep dive, listen to the interview with Tim Gauthier. We went deep on that, but just from the company commander perspective, sir, like the lead up, going in, going against the Republican Guard, you didn't really know that it was going to play out this way.
Right.
It was on their turf. They were in great defensive positions. Can you just talk us through, I don't know, the burden of command to some degree at that moment in time?
Sure.
How old are you then even?
Gosh, how old was I back then? In 91.
Like 20.
Yeah, I was 28.
28.
Yeah, 28 years old. Yeah. Maybe 27. Yeah, 27 we deployed, 28 probably at the time of the battle, I think. So, I really felt that I had this, been given this gift across my career of having kind of these formative tactical experiences at the National Training Center with this fantastic unit, the 2nd Armored Division. We were part of the Phantom Corps, the 3rd Corps, and our Corps commander's motto was "Fight at Night." He really inculcated in us a very high determination to be at the highest level of training, to always be ready for combat. And I took that into our troop when I took command of that troop in February of 1990. Mm-hmm. So before Saddam invades Kuwait. Now, I was accelerated into command of that troop because the troop had not performed well during a gunnery exercise at Grafenwehr. At the time, I was the regimental plans officer waiting for command, desperate to get into command
of course.
Off of the regimental staff. I was like, oh my God. So I couldn't wait to be part of a team and lead soldiers. So I'm at gunnery. The troop apparently wasn't doing well. I was planning a maneuver exercise for the regimental commander. The regimental commander came into the plans van as I was the regimental plans officer and said, "Hey, I'm getting in my van. It's going to take you to Bamberg, and you're going to start your change of command inventory for taking over command of Eagle Troop." So I go up there. There's a rear detachment guy who meets me there. You have to inventory property and all that stuff. I mean, so I just got a jump start on all that. Took command of the troop, and then what I found is you typically find with an organization that doesn't perform well like that, it's not the soldiers, right? It's not the junior leaders. It's just like part of the leadership dynamic wasn't right. So there was all this talent in this troop. Yeah. I mean, Tim Gauthier, man, his fellow platoon leaders, they were fantastic. We had incredible platoon sergeants. I think the first sergeant at the time was kind of part of the problem. He was, one of these guys who, when I laid out a training plan, he said, "Well, why is it that we want to do all this extra training?" And I said, "Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to find you another job, man."
Yeah.
And so there were some changes to be made. Don't get me wrong.
But I think that's part of that leadership of making sure that you can train your guys and push them hard. Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
So we were confident by this time. And the other thing that helped us a lot, I don't think Tim talked about this. It's kind of a detail, but we were going to lose a lot of our NCOs. So remember, Saddam invades Kuwait in August of 1990, right? And then I just knew from that point we're going. Yeah. In fact, we got together on a basketball court. We're about to do a maneuver rights exercise. You go out in the German countryside. We were maneuvering against a British cavalry unit, and we were doing our rehearsal, with the terrain drawn on the basketball court. And I brought everybody together and I said, "Okay, listen, we have to max out this training exercise." And we were doing platoon and troop gunnery afterwards. And because the next operations order I give you will likely be on the desert sands of Saudi Arabia, right? They're all looking like, right. So, but I really believed it. So we ramped up our training from that point. But between then and when we were alerted, we were losing a lot of our key sergeants. And where does combat power come from? Yeah. Combat power comes from sergeants leading soldiers and lieutenants leading platoons. That's where real power comes from, right? And so I start to train up more junior NCOs, sergeants, to take over those positions. And we were doing it in the context of mounted maneuver, but we're also doing military operations in urban terrain because we're developing leaders, right, who are preparing defenses of a building and those who are attacking and couldn't get a call for fire. I mean, so we're training super hard. Then what happened is when we got alerted, we got to keep a lot of those NCOs. And now we had all this depth, and we had depth of knowledge and confidence, right? Confidence.
They weren't frustrated that they were kind of having to go?
Hey, there's enough work to go around, right?
Yeah.
So it's great if you have a scout observer who's ready to be a gunner, you're in 24-hour operations.
Yeah.
The gunner can't be in the gunner seat every day, all day. If that gunner's trained to be a Bradley commander. So I think this is one of the key things is you always want to train your soldiers for the next level of responsibility, always, right? Because that gives you tremendous depth. The other key thing is you want to tell soldiers everything about how you're thinking about maneuver, how you're thinking about how you're going to fight and win together. Like you want your privates to know how you're envisioning troop operations and maneuver and actions on contact and integration of fires, because that frees them up to take initiative, which is what we saw in this battle.
Yeah.
I mean, we really, I issued fragmentary orders in contact and everything. I probably didn't need to do any of it. We were like, we knew what we were doing. And we knew where we were in relation to each other, how to cover for each other, And in Tim's case, how to secure our southern flank as we conducted this assault, So,
what was the feeling for you the night before that kicks off? And I know you all are moving up to that, but could you feel this coming to a head?
It was a combination of maybe a little bit of anticipation, but frustration because we kept moving for 20 kilometers and then stopping and moving and stopping. I'm like, let's get on with it, man.
Not because of you. That was headquarters. Like you advance to this phase line and hold.
Because what you had is you had the divisions behind the regiment. The regiment was conducting what's called an offensive covering force operation, which is meant to ease the forward movement of the main body, which were the heavy armored divisions behind us. We were supposed to prevent indirect and direct fire on that main body, allow them to get their logistics in place, and then identify and destroy the reconnaissance of the enemy. But what we kept hearing, and this didn't make sense to me at the time because we have tanks, don't get decisively engaged. I'm like, what does that mean? And so I, we were there was an emphasis on control of our forward movement such that we could hand off to the divisions behind us. And so the night before, our G troop, our ghost troop, led by a guy named Joe Sardiano, one of my West Point classmates, good friend, they had come across an enemy screen line. So I had our Fox troop, which was being led by Captain Tom Sprouse, great guys. TJ Lindsay was our lead platoon leader, fantastic leaders across the squadron. So they encounter these scouts, and they destroy BMPs. They capture some of these MTLBs, which are, if you think of a BMP without a turret, right? It's a personnel carrier.
Yep.
And they brought him to our squadron headquarters. We'd go to our squadron tactical command post, jump off my tank. Joe Sardiano had brought over these MTLBs, and we're looking at the maps. We're looking at the weapons. These are brand new weapons. They're in these vehicles are in very good condition, and it's clear they belong to the Tawalkana Division of the Republican Guard. So, okay, now we know, all right, we're going to get in a scrap, probably, because we're close. Then it poured rain all night. And so I'm just trying to get some sleep, so I'm ready for the next morning. And, not a lot of comfortable spots on a tank, right? We're inside a tank turret. Yeah. So I go into our troop command post. This is a 577. It's like a big cracker box type vehicle with the map board. And this is where Lieutenant John Gifford, our XO, it's his vehicle, with Staff Sergeant Viscara, our communications guy, one of the funniest human beings on the face of the earth. So there's a shelf on this thing. I just lay on the shelf and I go to sleep, on the shelf of the command post. And then a fragmentary order for the next day's operation comes over the radio, and Gifford shakes me. Hey, sir, we're getting a fragmentary. I'm like, oh, just take it, John, just take it. He shakes me again. He goes, hey, sir, it is wartime. I'm like, okay, all right, I'll get up. Since it is wartime. So I took the fragmentary order. We get ready for the next day. So what we have the next day is we get fog from the rain, right? Obscures our vision. Then the wind kicks up really high, and then we went from fog and rain to like a sandstorm, So we're now conducting this halting movement to the east, and what the fragmentary order did is it moved our troop from behind Fox Troop.
That's right. Yeah.
In a diamond formation into a box formation where we now assume the lead of the South, right? So it's a big shift. Our GPSs didn't work, 3/4 of the time.
Yep.
We're doing dead reckoning in the desert on the kind of a plotting board map, making contact with adjacent units. I mean, this is Gauthier had to do a lot of this.
Advanced, yeah.
And it's it was advanced, yeah. It was graduate level stuff, man.
Yes.
And so that's all going on the next day. This is the 26th of February. And we begin, again, this kind of halting movement to the east. And the height, or the low point for me, the point of depression for me almost, was, okay, well, we've gone far enough now, and we're going to hand off to the divisions, and we're going to send up bulldozers to dig us in. And my squadron commander pulls up, and I'm like, hey, sir, I can't in good conscience dig in this 70-ton killing machine. What the hell are we doing? I mean, are we not going to get in the fight? I mean, I'd engaged a BMP, destroyed one, and so our scouts the day before. So we've been a little bit of some skirmishes, right? Mm-hmm. But we weren't in the fight that we got there to get into it. And this might sound strange to people that you really wanted to be in. I mean, I wanted to get into a fight, right? We were ready. Who else was more ready than us? I don't think anybody was more ready than us. So my squadron commander pulls up. I always had a stash of repair parts too, which I mean, I was above board with it, shared it with others, but we had a thermal receiver unit, which you're not supposed to have, like in a cavalry troop. The squadron commander comes up, he said, "Man, my thermal sight's bad." And I go, I think we can fix it. Macias, our turret mechanic. Macias jumps in there. He said, "Yeah, we need a TRU." I'm like, "Okay, put one in."
Just replace it.
Or replace it. And he's looking at me like, I said, "Don't ask me, sir. I mean, just your tank is fixed.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Be grateful for that." So then we get a change in orders, right? This is at the God, I don't know, 6-2 Eastie, who knows, and then we went to the 6-5, and that's when we got in contact. We got in contact at the moment we had been given permission to advance to the 7-0 north-south grid line. And then once we were in contact, it was during the attack that my executive officer called me and said, "Hey, you're at the limit of advance." And I said, "Hey, just tell them I'm sorry. We can't stop." And then you heard from Tim. We continued the assault for another 3 or 4 kilometers, and then we stopped when we really had nothing left to shoot. Is when we stopped.
Can you describe the moment? Like Tim kind of describes what he's hearing on the radio, but as you're sitting in the tank and you kind of crest this ridge and you and you take, or berm, I suppose, and you take these 3 shots pretty quickly.
Right.
What's going on in a tank? Is that just for people who've never had to think of this?
Sure. Yeah. So what happened is when we get this permission to go to the 7-0, I think, I don't know how to attribute this except providence, man. I mean, honestly, I think, there are some things that happen in this battle that are not explainable, many things, except for, I think, my belief in God. I mean, honestly, So before we go over that rise, and we had done a fire command to suppress the village where Tim initially took fire, or Sergeant Harris, one of his scouts, took fire, and Tim pulls up, fire to tow. We shoot at the village, or the really barracks area, a fortified infantry enemy position. We get then permission to continue to the east. I crest this imperceptible rise about the same time that the 1st platoon, who are our scouts who are now oriented due east, identify a hotspot. And this is Sergeant David Lawrence, who was one of my scout squad leaders when I was a platoon leader at Fort Hood. He's now a scout section sergeant, and he is a fantastic scout and just like an irascible, irreverent guy. I mean, he's a hoot. So Bradley Feltman, later Command Sergeant Major Feltman, now Sergeant E5 Feltman, is his gunner, and they pick up a hotspot. And he says to Feltman, "Hey, put a toe into it, see what it is." Because we couldn't see what it was. The toe hits it. It's a T-72. It explodes the tank, and the turret, they identify as a T-72 when the turret gets blown up in the air. So he yells on the platoon net, "Tanks right front." And then our platoon did what they're trained to do. They start pumping out 25 HE, reconning by fire, 25 millimeter on the Bradleys. They opening fire held back the other two tank platoons because they didn't want to cross in front of the Bradleys when they're firing. Mm-hmm. And you can hear, if you've got the audio of this battle is available. We come over that rise. Right before that, I'm saying, "Hey, Red 1 cease fire. Red 1 cease fire. Red 1 cease fire. God damn it, And then I come over the rise, and then I'm up out of the hatch. I immediately see 8 T-72s,
They're part of a much larger force of, maybe 60 tanks or so, and other armored vehicles and more tanks in depth. And so you do what you're trained to do, right? You give a contact report. Well, first of all, you start shooting at the tanks. So my gunner says tanks direct front. I see him. And I said, fire, sabot, and adjust, which means, you got it, man. We have a high explosive tank round in the breach. We fired that at the first tank. I have a very vivid memory of this tank. It was at very close range. The high explosive round goes into the tank, detonates the ammunition in the tank, and the tank commander is ejected out of that tank into the air, and he's on fire. So that's the first. Then the crew is trained, right? So if you're in a tank, it's a 120 millimeter round. With service ammo or combat ammo, the breech comes almost all the way back to the back door. The gunner's out of the way of that breech coming back to the ammo door. He hits the ammo door release switch with his knee. The heavy armored door slides open. He hits the release on the sabot round. They're all marked S and H because I said fire, sabot, fire the heat, now fire sabot next, right? And then he drops this 90-pound round in his lap, spins it while the tank is moving, puts it into the breech with his fist. The breech comes up. He yells up, which means the gun is up, and he arms the gun at that time, gets back out of the way. The gunner, who is now indexed sabot for the ballistic solution, to fire a 14-pound titanium dart, depleted uranium dart, actually, that flies at 2 kilometers a second, right? So that's the second round that comes out. Now we're 3 seconds in, right? We're 3 to 4 seconds in. So I'm now on the troop net, right? My crew's doing what they need to do. I'm on the troop net, contact east, 8 armored vehicles. Green and white, are you with me? These are the 2 tank platoons. That's exactly what I said, right? Because I wanted them with me. And so, because now I'm separated on the other side. It's at the same time now, as this is going on, round 2's out, second tank destroyed. My driver says, "Hey, sir, we're going through a minefield. I thought you might want to know." So then I get on the troop net as Taylor now is putting the 3rd round in, right? And yelling up, and we're now destroying the 3rd tank. I'm on the troop net. I said, minefield, direct front, tanks, drive around the mines. Bradley's get in the tracks of the tanks. Because the tank could take an explosion, right? And these were surface-laid mines. They were interspersed with anti-personnel mines, right? These little ones with like the little prongs on them, toe poppers, some people call them. They were popping like microwave popcorn under the tanks. Doesn't matter. But what you want to do is avoid the box mines that are the big anti-tank mines. We had one tank, the S-3's tank, commanded by Major then Doug McGregor. His tank hit a mine, but it just blew off end connectors, and the tank was able to continue going. So now, okay, what's going on in the turret? You've got the cordite, the smoke coming out. I'm still up out of the hatch. I'm identifying the other armored vehicles, and then green and white both come over the top at the same time. Henskog, my driver, who said we're going through a minefield, he looks at the array of the enemy, Chris Henskog, and he knows how we fight. He knows that it's a frontal fire distribution pattern, so he turns our tank 45 degrees to the southeast to get all the guns in the fight. Wow. Like he does that on his own. I didn't tell him to do that, right? So now you have 8 other tanks. Imagine now 9 tanks firing around every 3 seconds and nobody misses. And you're all taking different targets. So if you're the enemy, that's not a good situation to be in. They got 2 rounds off at my tank that I didn't even notice. Our 2 platoon leaders who came over next saw 2 T-72s engage my tank. Another one of these things you can't maybe fully explain. Those impacted short of my tank. I think a lot of it has to do with bore wear of the T-72s. Maybe their ammo was wet, and they have an autoloader thing. So anyway, thankfully, nobody hit. Nobody hit. We penetrate the first line, and then Tim told the story, of the continued assault, the destruction of the enemy reserve, the consolidation, the defeat of a counterattack. And all told, we destroyed about a brigade-sized formation and suffered no casualties.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Gosh, normally I would spend a little more time here, but just in the interest of time, I'm going to jump us for a moment, sir, if it's okay. when you're commanding the 3rd ACR, you're in Iraq,
Yeah.
2005, 2006, southern Baghdad, Tal Afar. I've read about Operation
Restoring rights. Yeah.
Restoring rights.
Iyada al-Haq, or restoring rights. Yeah.
And I don't know what I would love to hear from you is jumping to that level of command and that responsibility.
Right.
Do you recall a moment or an experience, and maybe it's around that operation or maybe it's something else on that deployment that was particularly difficult for you from a leadership perspective?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I think it was in many ways a much more challenging environment because what happened in the Gulf War, right, is the 4th largest army in the world fought us symmetrically. Not a good idea, right? Now, the Tawalkana Division fought with courage, honestly. I mean, they and determination. Yeah. I'm very proud of our soldiers when we took the prisoners. I don't know if Tim talked about that. They were crying.
Yeah, they thought that it was going to be bad.
Yeah, they thought we were going to abuse them or kill them, and we treated them with great humaneness, and which is what American soldiers do. I mean, actually, we were searching their wallets, and they had all stolen cash from Kuwait. They had Rolex watches. We're giving it back to them.
Back to them.
And they're like, what?
What is this?
Right. So really, I'm so proud of our soldiers. What people don't really realize is our warrior ethos is what makes combat units effective, but it's also what makes combat less inhumane, right? And it's our standards which are immensely important. So, it was a different enemy. It's like we called them out on the schoolyard and beat them up, right? And they had fought against the Iranians. They were used to these kind of human wave infantry attacks. They had no idea what 9 tanks, 12 Bradleys could do to them in like 45 seconds. Yeah. Really a 23-minute battle and even beyond that, but really the battle was won in like a minute, I think. So now this enemy in Iraq in 2004, 5, 6, really 5 and 6 if we're talking about Operation Restoring Rights, it was a different fight against an enemy who was fighting asymmetrically. It was a terrorist organization organized into 4 battalions, the battalions of the One True God, who took over the city of Tal Afar and other parts of Nineveh province so they could access supply routes to Syria, supply routes for suicide bombers, for fighters, for explosives. And this became the Fort Benning, or now Fort Moore, Georgia, of the insurgency, Fort Tal Afar. Wow. They ran courses on kidnapping and murder, roadside bombs, obviously, mortars, snipers, first aid, propaganda, right?
Yeah.
It was the training base. And so they wanted to hold on to this place. And they gave orders to hold on to it. And I'm like, that's great, because we're going to kill or capture every one of these guys, And what we did is we first, like a good reconnaissance unit, we conducted reconnaissance. Guess who I run into as the S3 of a striker cavalry squadron attached to us? Tim Gauthier. Yeah. Right? and so we planned with him this major zone reconnaissance across all these rat lines or infiltration lines coming from Syria. We identify a lot of safe houses. We actually, sadly, in a firefight, we lost the governor of Anbar province, who was being held by Al Qaida in a safe house down there. But we disrupt them. We built up, our surveillance of the border, our ability to respond to the border. We secured the outlying towns. And then what we did at the same time, my friend of mine was the commander of the engineer brigade in Iraq, Colonel Bill Rapp. He sent me every dozer. And we built a berm around the entire city. Yeah. The entire city. I mean, like a 12-foot high berm across the whole city. We only left 3 routes in and out. We started to screen people coming in and out. We captured a lot of people trying to bluff their way through, Al Qaeda fighters and so forth. And then we conducted some raids, that were quite effective inside the city, but we were preparing for this large operation where we would conduct an offensive operation to identify and destroy the enemy within the city and set conditions for return of security and normalcy to the city of Tal Afar. To do that, we also evacuated the civilians. And Al Qaeda tried to keep them there as human shields, but we really forced the issue with the local leaders. We got them to evacuate. We screened the people who were leaving. We identified a few hundred who were trying to bluff their way out. But then we put triple standard concertina wire around the most dense areas of where the enemy was occupying, so they couldn't get out. So we could kill or capture all of them in there. And then we employed a large number of Iraqi forces and our forces. We task organized with really a half cavalry troop of 6 Bradleys and 4 tanks who were advising and giving combat support to an Iraqi infantry battalion.
I saw that.
So
Wow.
you had, half troop Iraqi battalion. Then what we were missing, and I briefed General Casey, he came out to get the briefing on our operation because they thought, is this going to be another Fallujah? They were worried about it.
That sounds similar.
The Iraqis were worried about it, That's why we named it. The previous operation Tal Afar was called Black Typhoon. Okay, we named it Restoring Rights for a reason.
Yeah.
To clarify our intentions, right? So we had a lot more Iraqi capacity to deal with. General Khurshid, commander of the 3rd Infantry Division. This guy Mayor Najim, who had been the chief of police, fantastic Iraqi leader.
Wow.
We had this guy, General Qais, a brigade. We had great Iraqi leadership. It was a big part of the story. So. But Casey comes to get the briefing at our headquarters. I brief him about it. I had requested 2 U.S. infantry battalions months earlier, multiple times, to my division and my corps commander. Nothing. Crickets, right? I'm keep bugging him, Hey, I need U.S. infantry. I need skilled infantry. Because in the cavalry, you're infantry poor. Mm-hmm. We're going to dense urban areas, You don't drive tanks into urban areas without infantry. You don't actually send infantry into urban areas without tanks either, right? It's combined arms, right? So we're in my little SUV thing, driving General Casey back to his airplane after the briefing. And I'm sitting in the front right of the car, and my division commander's back left. General Casey's behind me. He goes, HR, I think you need more infantry. And I'm looking at my division commander like, are you going to say anything, man? He didn't say anything. So I said, well, sir, I requested 2 infantry battalions months ago. 2nd of the 325 Parachute Infantry Regiment was landing in Baghdad at the time, got diverted that day, and landed at our airfield in Tal Afar the next day. And Colonel Chris Gibson, there were 3, a guy named Maserati, a fantastic team. Unbelievable team. Ready to fight. They came ready to fight. So I really upset, obviously, my division commander, my corps commander. There are reasons why, I was not selected for promotion to brigadier general for quite some time. But I was at peace with that, right?
Yeah.
Because it was what we needed. Yeah. So we had a concept of operation to defeat the enemy in detail, which means take a chunk of the city at a time, consolidate, take another chunk. Having more infantry allowed us to achieve a higher degree of simultaneity in the offense, right? And so, which created more dilemmas for the enemy. Like they had nowhere to go, And as I said, this parachute infantry battalion, man, they did a fantastic job. The White Falcons of the 82nd Airborne,
Yeah.
So, and then we dynamically task organized. I attached tanks and attached a cavalry troop, our G troop, to Grim troop, to that infantry battalion, and I attached an air cavalry troop to them. And they're like, really? Because infantry, man, our light infantry, they're ascetics. They're used to getting nothing and liking it, right? That's what their culture is.
Yep.
Now they've got all this combat power. They employed it masterfully, and they went into the dense urban area of Sarai, which is this is a 16th century Ottoman city, with just buildings built on top of buildings, and again, that's why you need infantry.
Are you thinking in your mind this could be like Fallujah, like guys kicking in doors and meeting that kind of resistance?
Well, no. So we had evacuated the civilians. We had done raids against leadership. I think I can say this now. We shut down their comms.
Yeah.
When we shut down their comms, what they did is they started to gather in alleyways, right? We were flying our Apaches at 5,000 feet, and we just started slamming them with HE Frag Hellfire missiles. Mm-hmm. And we expended our entire basic load of Hellfire missiles, had to get an emergency resupply. Then we turned, remember, everybody's isolated now, like they're penned in by concertina wire, right? We turned their comms back on. Our first intercept from them is, we are being slaughtered.
Wow.
I'm like, that's good.
Right.
And then they started taking inventory. Is this guy alive? Is that guy alive? No, dead. So we're getting all this battle damage. We need new leadership. Let's have a meeting and figure out who the leaders are. This is a little bit like what Israel did to
I was just thinking this with the pagers.
So then we watch them. We've got an unmanned aerial system watching them. They go into an abandoned school for the meeting. So we put a laser guided bomb from an F-16 into that building, right? But it was a dud, right? Very unusual. But you know what happens is all of their security detail guys run into the building.
Collapse into there.
The second bomb was not a dud.
Wow.
And so now we killed all the guys who were trying to reestablish their chain of command. And so their leadership was fragmented, and that's when we attacked. And the night that we attacked, we were going to use everything. We wanted to use every weapon system in our arsenal, not just for style points, but for the psychological effect. We fired GMLRS missiles, first ones ever in combat, from Sinjar, from Sinjar into the headquarters building, what we knew we had identified as the headquarters building for Al-Qaeda in the town. It's at night. They came like black darts out of the sky, dropped that building, with the precision munition. And that kicked off Apaches, the laser guided bombs, and then we had to raid even our air defense troop with our Avenger systems, with the quad 50 calibers and everything. We're all pumping into anything that looked like a defensive position. Our tanks that are coming up through like a cemetery on the southern part of the Sarai district, they're expending basic loads of ammo, tank main gun rounds into the where the enemy defensive positions were, and then we're hitting them in depth with all sorts of other capabilities. We used the Miklik. The Miklik is the armored line charge you fire because we knew that there were like 80 or so, maybe 90 IEDs on this road. So we cleared the road with a Miklik. We used everything. I mean, and again, not just to get style points, but from the enemy perspective, all hell was coming down on them. Our Iraqi Division commander, General Khurshid, really great guy. He was a short guy. Hated to wear a helmet because he looked silly in a helmet. He looked like the Flintstones character Kazoo. Kazoo, like the guy from outer space. But I made him wear a helmet, man. And we're walking out at the 16th century Ottoman castle that allows you to look down into the city. We also had a SEAL team with us. We had Iraqi Special Operations Forces. We had an Iraqi brigade, Special Operations Brigade. We also had our Iraqi division, as I mentioned, with these battalions task organized. So Khurshid's walking with me. I gave him a PVS-14, which is a monocular night vision device. And he's watching as 30 millimeter casings from Apaches are raining down on us. The MLRS is hitting. Everybody's opening up tanks, Bradleys, as I mentioned, quad 50s, right? The Miklik's going off. And so then we get into the SEAL position, and we put our long-range acoustic device up, and we're blasting heavy metal music down into the to the dense urban area in Sarai. And Kazoo, of course, he looks at me and he goes, I'm glad I'm on your side this time. This time.
Yeah,
because he'd fought in the Gulf War.
Oh my gosh.
So
what a story.
So this, there was only one reporter there. This is the other thing that was good. And so, when we unleashed this on them, also in the United States, Katrina was happening, Hurricane Katrina. Yeah. So there was really no focus on what we're doing. We had evacuated the city, so we were able to use this firepower without really the fear of harming innocents. Yeah. And then when we destroyed Al-Qaeda, the city just came back to life, man. And we had everything wired for that. We had the power lines ready to go. We had everything was already pre-contracted. Restored the police force. We had the training lined up, the screening for it. Refurbishing the gardens and the schools. We had the school books and the teachers aligned. Right? Yeah. Life had been choked out of the city for over a year. So the people just come back, and it was a beautiful thing. It really was, and our troopers did a fantastic job. I mean,
what a combined arms effort. Yeah. One thing, just as we kind of wrap here, obviously you are a master of history, a student of it, you're a best-selling author. Looking at where we are today in America, is there any historical reference you think people should be looking at, given where we sit right now?
I'll tell you, I think always you can learn from history. And I'm thinking about a couple of examples. I think the pre-World War I period, which should be of great concern. There's a great essay by a great historian named Margaret Macmillan, who wrote a book about how to be careful about not misusing history, called Dangerous Games. But she wrote a fantastic essay back in 2014 about how she thought 2014 was like 1914. It's called The Rime of History, and it's on the Brookings website. I highly recommend it. And there's a book called Unquiet Frontier that was co-authored by Jakob Griegel and Wes Mitchell. I reviewed it in the Wall Street Journal before I met the authors. Now I know the authors and they're good friends. But what what Jakob does and what West does is they reason by historical analogy in a very effective way. And essentially, they took kind of the geostrategic perspective of some of the great, geopolitical theorists, Mackinder, for example, and talked about how we were at risk of the Eurasian landmass, the world island, in the words of Mackinder, is becoming dominated by a revanchist, revisionist power hostile to us, and that's a dangerous situation. And so they talk about strengthening alliances on what they called the rim, what Mackinder called the rimland, right? And the importance of strengthening our deterrence at this critical time with very capable forward position forces, strengthening our alliances. It's a fantastic book. But I mean, it's the way I think about the world is through historical analogy, recognizing the limits. History can help you ask the right questions. It can help you avoid kind of the same mistakes, that you people have made in the past. And I think it can help you maybe identify opportunities that you're missing, right?
Yeah.
In combat, I'll tell you, I mean, it's all about seizing the initiative. We talked about two very different wars, but what I always had in my mind is, how do you kick the enemy's ass?
Yeah.
How do you pose the enemy with so many dilemmas that they're just worried more about their survival than what they can do to you? How do you seize, retain, exploit the initiative, right? And if you always think that way opportunistically, that carries over, I think, also to some of these geostrategic competitions short of war, right?
Yeah.
What are the sources of enemy strength, and how do you isolate them from sources of strength? What are the enemies, your adversaries, your rivals' weaknesses, and how do you exploit those weaknesses? Is thinking competitively, like I guess as I was doing on the soccer field or whatever, or the frisbee football field with Tim Gauthier.
Overwhelmed. The other thing I was struck in the book, all these fascinating people you sit down and have a dinner with or lunch with when you're national security advisor, certainly in your time in uniform. Is there one person that was just like, this was a very memorable moment?
Oh yeah, a lot of them. Certainly some of the world leaders. I had Mohammed bin Salman over for dinner at the house. Or King Abdullah, or others. My counterparts were fantastic internationally, but Henry Kissinger was. I mean, he became a friend. And the guy was very witty, very witty. I also tell the story. I tell a story in the book. This moving experience I had with him. So my books had just gotten delivered to the office. Right, he had visited before, but my office collection was not there, and I had selected the books I thought would be relevant. And of course, Kissinger's books, all of them. But I pulled down the White House years, and which is his memoir of his time as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State. And so I open it up and ask him to inscribe it, and what I see is an inscription from my mom, who gave me the book in 1991.
No way.
And then it dawned on me that day that I was meeting with Kissinger was the anniversary of my mom's death, and so I had this opportunity to tell him about my mom, and then he told me about his mother and how she was, so strong in helping them flee in advance of the Holocaust and get to America. And so I had this kind of moment with him that was very moving. But he also gave me really good advice across the time, or even retrospectively when I was writing the book. I did a Zoom with him. This is shortly before he passed away, And I said, hey, Henry, what advice do you have for me? And he goes, don't do what I did. Don't try to write about everything. Write about experiences that illuminate your experience. Bring readers into the White House with you, and then decide what themes you want to address. And I said, Henry, when we met, and I mentioned the time we had this conversation, I tell the story in the book. I don't tell this part of the story in the book, but I said I had this decision to make. Do I play the political games, in infighting, or do I just do my job? And I said, I just figured I was just going to do my job. And when I was used up, I'd be used up. And I was at peace with that. And he goes, you made the right choice. They would have eaten you alive, is what he told me. I can't do it. I can't figure out how to ingratiate myself to a boss, or how to play these, the politics games, or the infighting, the power politics of Washington. But he had a great sense of humor. I mean, he told me, he said, remember, he goes, about the relationship. I was talking about, I had a difficult relationship with the Secretary of State, And I didn't bag on the Secretary of State when I talked to him. But I said, how can I make this better? He said, never has the relationship between the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State been better than when I held both positions.
Yes, I read that. I wonder if he'd been waiting to say that for a long time.
But he's a guy
That's
also,
amazing.
he lived life to the fullest. I called him on New Year's Day
in 2018, just to say thank you. Hey, Happy New Year.
Wow.
Thank you for the support you've given me over the months. And what he said is, I'm at Oscar de la Renta's mansion in somewhere in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean. It is magnificent,
as one does. Yeah,
and he's like 98 years old. So
How
he's
great.
Yeah, he was a fantastic person, and so many people I got to. And I hope the theme through the book is, it was a privilege to do that job.
It's clear,
and it's a privilege to serve, right?
Yeah.
In any capacity, and so anyway, I only lasted 13 months, and I explain why that happened in the book. But the book is largely a story of a difficult environment, but trying to transcend those difficulties and to get some good work done for the country and for the president.
It comes true. There's two questions I ask everybody, sir, right at the end here. One is there anything you carried with you when you were deployed that had sentimental value, good luck charm, something somebody gave you that you just wanted on you?
Right. So, I would always carry, things that my family gave me, St. Christopher medals, that kind of stuff. But, I carried books with me, And I mentioned Tolstoy's short stories, like the tree felling or the wood felling or Sebastopol sketches, right? And so I would read, and that I think takes you away from, but also it helps you contemplate maybe, what's ahead of you and how to be a more effective leader. So the books I took with me, one of the books I took with me was Combat Commander, which was General Ernest Harmon's memoir, who actually wrote kind of the Rosetta Stone of desert combat, called Notes on Combat Actions in Tunisia and North Africa, which I based our battle drills, a lot of what we did on. Yeah. So that book got destroyed. Somebody ransacked one of our mill vans, or the storage containers, because I didn't take it with me on the attack into Iraq. But my dear friend Louis Sorley, Bob Sorley, who's a fantastic historian, was a great military professional. He found another copy for me, another first edition, and sent it to me later. Wow. But books are were my friends.
They're always with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell the story in the book Battlegrounds. I tell the story of when I first go to get to go to Washington to be National Security Advisor. My future son-in-law was there because he was on his way back to Fort Benning from some I think his bachelor's party. He's coming back from Connecticut down his way, and I'm pulling books down. He's like, "Why are you taking all these books with you?" And so I have a discussion in the book Battlegrounds about how history can help you understand your responsibilities and think clearly about how you can discharge those responsibilities effectively.
Last one is looking back 34 years of a lot of sacrifice, time away, leading troops, and difficult situations that we didn't even get into. Looking back on those times, would you do it again?
Absolutely. And I miss it, man. I mean, obviously, as you know, combat is not without cost, and the hardest part is seeing your fellow soldiers, people who you love, members of your family, really, your Army family, killed or wounded. We lost 63 troopers in our regiment in Iraq from 2005 to 2006. I think about them a lot. I think about those who were on my security detail, quite a bit. Private Knott was our first casualty. I wrote an essay about him in the Free Press on Memorial Day a couple of years ago. It was hard to write it. It was hard.
I can't even imagine.
Somebody asked me to do it. Barry Weiss, who's the editor and founder of Free Press, asked me to write an essay. So I did it. And I'll tell you, it made me realize that sometimes suppressing your emotions might not be healthy, but sometimes it's the best way to cope with it, And so you think about that. You think about the hardships of service, but I think what people don't get, and what I try to explain to people, are the rewards of service, right? Being part of a team in which the man or woman next to you is willing to give everything, including their own lives for you. And good Army units, good military units, they take on the quality of a family, right? And you're bound together by mutual trust, respect, and affection. Your sense of honor, not wanting to let each other down. Your willingness to sacrifice for one. I mean, the military service is tremendously rewarding. And I think our popular culture kind of cheapens and coarsens the experience. It doesn't allow people to understand those rewards a lot of times.
Sir, I can't thank you enough for the time. Really, really appreciate it.
Oh, Ryan, hey, thanks for the privilege of being with you, and thanks for this awesome program. I mean, I hope you get more and more listeners, and it helps. What you're doing is fantastic for a number of reasons, but what you're doing is you are helping American citizens understand better those who fight and serve in their name.
Yes.
And I think that's a super important mission.
Thank you, sir.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story. As you could probably tell, I definitely did. That was one I had been looking forward to for a long time and never imagined we'd have a chance to sit down with someone like HR. I was also just beyond impressed with how well read he was. And in particular, something I mentioned afterwards to a family member was he remembered the names of all of these people he served with, who they were, full names, ranks, where they were from. And I think that's like really the mark of a great leader. He genuinely cared about all these guys. And that is something you don't see every day. And that really came through. And the fact that he just reads so much and has such a great grasp of history. The guy's a New York Times bestselling author. He's a professor at Stanford. I can't even imagine being in his class. I hope that the kids who are there appreciate what they're getting with that. And I guess that's why you go to Stanford. Hey, I just wanted to say thanks for everybody for listening. Of course, check out our newsletter, combatstory.com/newsletter. One interesting comment we had from Mark S., retired, on our sit down with Glenn Korn, digging into Lebanon, Israel, Middle East. A little bit of a different take on Combat Story to just give people a taste of what's going on. But he says another good episode. Thanks, Ryan and Glenn. This satisfies my Combat Story appetite. Keep them coming. And we're going to do a few more of those. I find them very interesting. And Glenn is somebody who reminds me a lot of HR, just very senior ranks, very down to earth, still very much tied into what's going on. So hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening this far, if you've made it this far. And of course, wherever you are in the world, stay safe.